And we're reporting to? Perfect.
Wait.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's July 27th, 2021 at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd like to call to order the Nevada Resilience Advisory Committee and ask our administrative assistant to call the roll.
David Fogerson,
Present.
Billy Samuels,
Here.
Andy Ancho, Andy?
See him on the screen there.
Yeah, he's on the screen.
Andy Answer was present, sorry.
Roy Anderson, Travis Anderson, Noah Boyer,
Present.
Elizabeth Breeden,
Here.
James Chrisley,
Present.
Jason Danon, Cassandra Darrow, Bob Denhart,
Present.
Greg Dupolo, Kelly,
President, that's Echeverria.
I'll get it someday. Andrea S. Janine Freeman,
Here.
Mike Heidemann,
Present.
Eric Holt,
Yep, I'm here.
David Hunkup, Jeremy Hines,
Any hacker shares from BK Radio, KMG M150.
Graham Kent,
Looks like Chief Ancho might have a mic.
Mary Ann LaFoon,
Here.
Chris Lake, Carolyn Levering,
Here.
Ryan Miller, Tanil Pereira, here, Matthew Peterson,
Here.
Sean Romeyer,
Present.
Misty Robinson, Rachel Skidmore,
Present.
Corey Solferino,
Present.
Melinda Southard, Carrie Underwood, Mike Wilson, Stephanie Woodward, Bunny Bishop,
Present.
Rebecca Bernard, Kate Callahan, Felix, Mike Dizak, Melissa Friend, Cheryl Gonzalez, Moira Howenstein, Jill Hemingway, Patricia Herzog,
Here.
Casey, Selby Marks, Catherine Nielsen,
And Chief Anderson did text me, he's there.
Hey Dave, can you hear my microphone now?
Yes, Travis, you're good.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you.
Travis or Roy?
Travis.
Thank you. We have quorum.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item number 2, which is public comment. This is discussion only. No action may be taken upon a matter raised under this item of the agenda until the matter itself has been specifically included on an agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. Public comments may be limited to 3 minutes per person, discretion of the chair. Comments will not be restricted based upon viewpoint. If you are on a telephone, remember you have to hit *6 to unmute yourself. Again, *6 to unmute yourself. I'll open up for any public comment. Is there any public comment?
This is Dave Hunkup, Reno Sparks Indian Colony. I'm also here in the meeting.
Awesome, thank you, sir. Any additional public comment from anyone? Again, if you're on, follow us on YouTube, you'd like to do public comment, it is *6 to unmute yourself when you call in. While we're waiting, I have 3 items of public comment. The first one is we do have the Tamarack fire, which is still burning in Douglas County, Nevada, along with Alpine County, California. Through the collective efforts of the 3 counties, they sheltered 600 people in 3 different shelters, including the Washoe Tribe, Douglas County residents, and Alpine County residents. It was a nice collaborative event between the different jurisdictions. We did have some confusion on evacuation notices because California obviously has mandatory evacuations and Nevada does not have mandatory evacuation unless it's at the order of the governor. And there's some confusion from the incident management team putting out mandatory evacuation orders into Nevada that has caused some media inquiries regarding that. Douglas County did declare a disaster, and the state of Nevada, we also declared a disaster on their behalf. They lost approximately 12 homes in the process, and we continue to work that disaster with those local responders. Big thanks to Lyon County for stepping up and opening a shelter in their community for the community next door to them. And we're going to do hopefully a pretty decent after-action review of the emergency management actions, public alerting notification, the functional access needs, the sheltering, the evacuation piece, all those involved. So that way we can see how this goes and see what we do in the future. The second public comment I have is Nye County experienced some flooding last night from a rain event, and the day before they had a wind event. They are discussing right now whether they're going to issue a county disaster declaration, and we do have DM staff that's in Southern Nevada. They're going to go over and visit with them tomorrow, and so that way we can see how we can help them best. Sounds like some damage to some county roads and some county buildings. And my third comment is we have a guest present that's actually been in the EOC for quite a long time now, Mark Schubert. He's our FEMA integration technician. Team. Sorry, I forget the team part because there's only one of you. He is our liaison to FEMA that's actually embedded here in the EOC with us. He helped us all through COVID. So many of you folks knew him through COVID, but he's actually been employed here pre-COVID, and now he's transitioned out of the COVID activities and is just now our senior advisor from FEMA to help us manage that relationship and then any workings between the two of us. So I want to make sure everybody knows about Mark and our ability to have that. The FEMA FIT program has been fantastic for us, especially me coming in as a new chief for the state, being able to walk into him and ask a question about how FEMA does things. He's been an awesome resource for us. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Any additional public comment? Again, if you're on YouTube or telephone, *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, seeing no further public comment, we'll move to item number 3. This is approval of the minutes. This is discussion possible action. Committee will discuss and review the minutes of the June 23rd, 2021 committee member meeting. The committee may vote to amend and approve or approve the minutes as provided. I'll open up for any discussions and any possible motions.
Chief Jeannie Freeman for the record. I make a motion to approve the NRAC minutes from the June 23rd, 2021 meeting minutes as written.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. A motion first by Dr. Freeman. Since you called me chief, I will call her doctor. Do we have a second?
Bob Denhart, second.
Thank you, Bob. A second from Bob. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, we'll move on to item number 4. This is a presentation from NV Energy, or NV Energy mitigation for the state of Nevada. It's a discussion only. Liz Breeden, the Senior Emergency Management Administrator with NV Energy, will discuss their current mitigation efforts outlined in the Natural Disaster Protection Plan. She'll also discuss recent customer communication, public preparedness, public outreach, and changes to Public Safety Outage Management Program, also known as PSOM, tiers in Nevada. Liz.
Let me get my screen shared. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect, thank you. So this is Liz Breeden with NV Energy Emergency Management, and we're gonna go over our NV Energy Natural Disaster Protection Plan and our PSOM update for 2021. So we'll go over today our fire mitigation efforts that we've been doing since 2019, our weather and thresholds, our tier 1 elevated, tier 2 and tier 3 zones, some customer communications, our customer resource centers, some lessons learned from past events, and then if we can do question and answer. So what is public safety outage management? This came out of Senate Bill 329, which we put out to the Public Utility Commission and out into legislature in 2019. So it got approved. We renamed it the Natural Disaster Protection Plan. And then as a part of it, we have our public safety outage management. A way to think about it for this group is it's essentially a hazard mitigation plan for NV Energy. What are we doing? What projects are we working on to harden our infrastructure, harden our grid? And then what are we also doing to make sure and mitigate any secondary hazards that might occur from our infrastructure during a weather event or, and this is all hazards. So it could be a wind event, it could be a winter storm, things like that. So that's kind of a good way to think about it. We've been doing this since 2019. When we first rolled it out, it really concentrated on our tier 3 zones. And how we got to that is we worked with local agencies to get fire maps for the past about 100 years. We overlaid those on each other and identified where our most at-risk areas. So our tier 3 zones are the Mount Charleston in southern Nevada and the Lake Tahoe Basin in northern Nevada. And now we're expanding it down into our tier 2 zones and tier 1 elevated. We're really putting these efforts in place even more than we were for the past 2 years. The biggest kind of highlight of our plan is PSOM. That's where we temporarily shut off power in order to, for the safety of our community, to prevent any stuff blowing into our lines and causing a disaster or hazard because of that, most commonly a wildland fire. A PSOM event, we look at multiple different things, including weather conditions, vegetation levels, fire observations, field observations, and guidance from our local fire departments and first responders. Like I said, we've been working on this for about 2 years, or when we fully have been putting it out there, we've been working on it longer than that. We did some close work with San Diego Gas and Electric, who's been doing this for over 10 years. So when we were trying to build this plan to present to the Senate bill, we did a lot of research and proactive work before that. So we worked with somebody who's been doing it for a while. So some of our ongoing mitigation efforts in progress, on about 170 poles in our tier 3 areas and our elevated risk areas, we've been putting this fire mesh wrap around it. So a way to think about it is it's essentially chicken wire with some foam or things embedded into it that when it catches fire, it blows up like a marshmallow and protects that pole from getting burned. It still gets charred, but it still remains standing. And this is good because as long as the pole is up and above ground, we can keep that line energized as long as it doesn't impact any safety risks for any fire crews or public safety that it might be around it. But the longer we keep the poles up, the longer that we can keep that line energized and the communities in power. We've put out, like I said, about 170 poles. And I know this year we went to the Public Utility Commission to get approval to start doing that in more of our high risk areas, more along that urban interface where our wood poles are at risk. Other things we're doing are fuels mitigation and treatment. So where we can, we'll do right-of-way clearing up to 1,000 feet on either side of our infrastructure. This is because we don't want any dead trees or dying trees or trees that come down to a wind event to fall into our lines and then start a fire and fall down to the ground and start burning the vegetation under it. So we're doing two things is we're clearing the right-of-way on either side of our poles. So as you can see on the picture on the right, really making a big gap on either side of that. So if a tree were to fall, it would hopefully miss our lines. And then we'll go through under the lines and do vegetation clearing so that if something were to fall in our lines, catch fire and drop, that it just drops to straight dirt and doesn't catch anything else on fire. So a good way to think about it is kind of doing defensible space around our infrastructure. And so we do that in multiple ways. We've worked with our local fire agencies to get hand crews out there to do the clearing under our lines to do, we call it pole grubbing, which is just clearing that vegetation from around the poles. We do have a masticator, and I believe that is the top left picture. And you can see that we've cleared all that vegetation along under our lines. And sometimes we try to partner where there's a roadway so that, you know, it's twofold where we clear the vegetation so our lines don't fall down and start a fire along that vegetation. But since it's along a roadway, we clear it through there. So, you know, the human caused incidents don't occur either, the smoke, the cigarette butts, the dragging of chains. So we kind of look at where we can capitalize and do more for the time. We've also employed 300 Spanish goats, and you see in the lower left corner. So they are the hardest working NV Energy employees we have, and they're out there every day clearing under our lines and where we can decrease the vegetation. For a while, we're up off of Mount Rose Highway. They were off of Spooner. I'm not sure where they are now, but they are actively helping with the vegetation management as well. We've cleared about 1,800 acres. Like I said, we partner with our local agencies, the first responders, the fire agencies, do cooperative partnerships. They do the fuels work, the chipping, the removal, and we've partnered with them to do some education on defensible space in those high-risk areas. So this is a big wordy slide, but I think it was kind of important to note that we do understand the benefit of undergrounding, and we're doing what we can to do that. And we have partnered with local HOAs and our fire agencies to select prioritize lines in our high risk area that we can underground. Underground is very expensive and it takes a lot of permits. There's a lot of steps to go through before we do it, but where we can partner with other agencies or other construction projects that are already in place, we are working to do that to kind of lower the risk and to get it done quicker. So you can see in the North Tahoe State Route 28, NDOT is doing some work out there. And so we're working with them to underground 2 sections of our Incline Village line. And then the East Shore bike lane, we've worked with them to, while the road is under construction, to put some undergrounding as well. Cell on wheels, we know communication is can go down quite easily when we do de-energize or when we do lose power to those cell towers. So we have NV Energy has the ability, we have contracts with both FirstNet and Verizon Wireless to get a cell on wheels out there. And I do believe that we are purchasing 10, or it says 10, but I believe we're purchasing 12 of our own. So that's an option for as a resource that NV Energy can provide both during a public safety outage management or during a real emergency. I know we deployed 2 of them down to the Tamarack fire and were able to use those and get some cell service into the area. So that's an asset that we bring to the community and are pretty happy about that we're able to do that. So we're going to kind of go more deep into our public safety outage management. Maybe. We'll talk about the criteria and thresholds and updates to the plan this year. So in 2020, we used 3 different parts for our tier 3 areas. We used energy release component. So how likely is the fire to burn if it were to catch fire, wind gusts, and then Fosberg fire weather index, which includes many different numbers of humidity, temperature, wind speed. It all kind of comes together in one number. So this is what we used for the 2020 season. We didn't feel it was an adequate representation of what was actually occurring out in the field. And so we've moved into a new criteria for our tier 3 area. And what we decided to do was we're still going to keep the wind gusts, but we're going to go more to a burning index. And so that does incorporate, you know, some of the ERC values, but it also kind of, as I understand, I am not a firefighter by any means, but it's kind of how big a flame length can be. And so with working with our first responder agencies, they've said about a 7-foot flame and a wind gust or wind speed of about 40 miles an hour is when that fire is, you know, really they can lose control of it and is not the easiest fire to fight. And so that's kind of where we put our burning index, and the burning index is flame length times 10. So a 7-foot flame is a burning index of 70. And then the wind speed is so that when it gets above 40 miles an hour, that's when that fire can get out of control. You can't fly, firefighting assets, things like that. So that's what we feel is putting our community most at risk. And so those are criteria that was just approved by the PUCN at the end of June, sorry. And so that's what we will use moving forward in our tier 3 area of the Lake Tahoe Basin and Mount Charleston. So some benefits, I kind of already talked about this. We didn't feel it was the best. The old fire Fosberg wind weather index wasn't a best representation of what the actual conditions were out in the field and what the impact could be. So that's why we moved to this new formula. So like I said, we did tier 3 in 2020, and now for 2021, we are moving down into the urban areas, at least in northern Nevada. There will be a map after this, but you'll see that our tier 1 elevated and tier 2 areas are subject to a public safety outage management, a PSOM event. And how we come to that conclusion, we don't have that hard analytics like we do in tier 3, but we have some qualitative data that we're going to look at, and that includes the weather conditions from our weather stations. We work very closely with the National Weather Service, field observation and vegetation management conditions. You know, we're always trying to clear under our lines and create that right of way, and then working with first responders and key stakeholders that have impact, any fires that might be in the area, and any conditions that we might need to consider. We have different mitigation efforts before we get to an actual PSOM event, and those include staging additional resources, both fire and NV energy in the area. We have the ability to put our lines into what we call one shot, and what that is, so if something were to fall into our lines, it just automatically opens and de-energizes until we can patrol it and re-energize it. So that limits, you know, a dry tree branch falling into our lines and it continuously trying to close, which could potentially catch whatever is in our lines on fire. It would drop to the ground and start a fire. So we have some other mitigation efforts before we, just strictly de-energize the lines. So this, like I said, is a picture of our new expanded tiered areas. In the left picture, you see kind of that more reddish area. That's our tier 3. That's kind of the area we've been doing since 2019. And now it's growing over northern Nevada. Southern Nevada is the same. In the middle picture, you see a little orange and kind of the southern Nevada area. That is Mount Charleston. But when you look at the pictures, you see it's going out into Elko and Humboldt County. The orange colors are tier 2 area, and then the yellow mustard color is our tier 1 elevated. So when you look across northern Nevada, we're kind of getting into that urban interface where the city limits kind of meet that wildland area, and that's where we feel we're most at risk. But we also understand that not everyone on the circuit is at risk. And so this is an example of our maps where we, this whole circuit is at risk. So this is kind of one of our new de-energization zones. It's the Muller 1295 in Minden. So you can see we designated this as a proactive de-energization zone. But in the Reno Sparks area, we don't think that we should de-energize the entire circuit. So we've been doing a lot of proactive work in inserting cuts. We call them circuit cuts or cutoffs. And you can see on this slide, there's a little lightning bolt here. So that's where we can isolate the most at-risk part of the circuit and only de-energize them while leaving the rest of the circuit in power. So when we initially started rolling this out, we were looking at circuits, and it could be over 200,000 people, 200,000 customers across northern Nevada. And we've really worked to get some circuit cuts in and sectionalize the really impacted areas, those actual people along that urban interface. So we'll talk about customer communications and notifications. Our goal is a 3-pronged approach. We want to create awareness of the PSOM event. We want to encourage outage and emergency preparedness overall, just because your power can go out for any reason, a winter storm, a carver's pole, there's a lot of different reasons why the power can go out besides a PSOM event. So we want to do that proactive preparedness for our customers. And then we also want to drive awareness about personal fire safety, that defensible space, and making sure that, around, if you have a pole near you, that you're not just letting the vegetation grow under it, even in your yards. And we're really partnering with Living with Fire to get that message out. So how are we notifying our new customers that are in this PSOM zone or on these circuits that could get de-energized? Letters, I believe this week, will get sent out via mail and email to our impacted customers. We're holding public open houses, ongoing stakeholder and large customer communication. So these types of meetings we're having today, many other NV Energy employees are having them with their stakeholders as well. They are doing a big outreach to our Green Cross customers, our telecommunication infrastructure, and our critical facilities. So customer service is reaching out with them directly and working with them to see what their needs could be, and then discussing with them what options are available to them. We are encouraging our customers to sign up for My NV Energy, and that gives us the opportunity and gets them into our platform to notify them via phone, text, and email. And then we're doing news media, social media, paid media, all the different outlets we have available to us to get that message out. So what does a PSOM implementation timeline look like, we'll say? NV Energy gets about a rolling 7-day kind of weather outlook from our weather analytic company. At about 4 to 5 days is when we kind of get a better picture of what we're doing moving forward. And about that 4 to 5 day mark is when we notify our first responders, our critical infrastructure, those telecommunication companies. They kind of get a pre-notification. They get, a longer timeline so that they can prepare and get, their plans in place as well. 72 hours, Green Cross customers will get a phone call from our customer care group and talk to them about the different options available to them, give them that additional notice to prepare for the outage. At 48 hours is when we do the mass notification. We post to social media and we start really, blasting it out there that we're seeing a possible PSOM event, and do the communication that way. And then again at 24 hours, at 12 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, time of de-energization, and then time of re-energization. So at 48 hours, our customers will get many, many notifications about the planning and the outlook of an event. We'll talk about customer resource centers quickly. So we understand that people lose their power every single day. Being without power is not an emergency, but we also understand that it can become an inconvenience and can become an emergency for some people. So we have set up these customer resource centers, and what it is a place for customers to go to get additional information on the outage, to get ice, to get some water, to get a charging bank for their cellular or mobile devices if they need, and also even to charge their devices if needed. So the picture you see here is our customer resource van up at the Mount Charleston Resort. So that is kind of what it looks like for Mount Charleston. For Northern Nevada, our tier 3 areas will probably get a geographically stationed place. So it might be at a hotel, it might be at a community center, it's going to be in an actual structure. And the reason for this is those outages can be longer. And so if somebody needs to work from home or charge their devices for a longer period of time, they'll have a place indoors to go and do that type of thing. For a tier 1 elevated tier 2 CRCs, it's probably going to be this drive-through option where customers can drive through, get their stuff, and continue on their way, because we don't see that tier 1, tier 2 outage being as long. Because we've really isolated those areas and can patrol them a lot easier, and it's not as treacherous of a terrain. So some lessons learned. On November 6th and 7th, we did an activation in Southern Nevada, our Mount Charleston area. At the time, we met those criteria of being over 45 miles an hour. We have a weather station on the top of Mount Charleston now, and we were able to see that at the peak of the event, it got up to 65 miles an hour. So our efforts were justified and were beneficial because we were able to not have any secondary impacts from that weather event. We activated our ERO to a level 0 on November 3rd. So that's our ICS structure, that's our EOC. So we activated them about 3 days out. And then we set up our tier 3 customer resource center up at the retreat for our customers to come through and get some information from. This was our first event, and so there were many, many lessons learned from it because we are green at this. We are still learning as we go. We learned that we didn't have a defined staging area for crews. We didn't have additional radios for external entities that were kind of working in the area. We didn't have a really good check-in and check-out process for that. And so, we've been continuously working on this, remedying any of those issues that we see arise. Another one was April 25th of this year. The same thing happened where we saw the weather increase, or the weather projections over 45. They actually got up to 56 miles an hour. And this one was interesting because we were going to try and do some mitigation efforts before we de-energized. So we had fire engines staged out there. We had additional NV Energy crews staged out there because the first couple of days we didn't see the weather getting that high, but it was a concern for us. So we decided to put those extra resources out there. And then about 2 days before the event, we saw the wind really kick up. We really exceeded those thresholds. So then on a dime, we turned and went to a public safety, a PSOM event. We did all of our notifications. We stood up our CRC and executed it pretty effectively, I would say. And I think that shows the great success for NV Energy because we have been talking about this. We've been working through it internally, that we were able to continue down the road, do mitigation efforts. And then when we needed to, we were able to twist, do what we needed to get done to be able to provide for our customers. Any questions? If I'm allowed, I don't know.
Liz, this is Billy Samuels for Clark County.
Yep.
One, I want to say thank you for that presentation. It was very informative. Two, I always say that you guys call me when I'm going out of town. And three, do you have any data that suggests that these PSOMs are saving homes or saving money? Like, do you guys research that? Like, if we did not do that, this would have happened, so you guys can justify those outages?
So I heard your third question. I didn't hear your second, so I'll answer your third. I think we do. So we work closely with our partner agencies across the Hill. And I don't, it's hard to say. I don't know if we actively look into it to see the, cost benefit analysis of it. But I think from historically, we can see from over the Hill that there's a benefit. I don't know if we would ever be to the point where we would just not have a PSOM to see what the potential impact or risk could be. I can't speak to it of whether or not somebody in NV Energy is actively researching that or looking into it.
Yeah, I hope you're not thinking that I'm suggesting that you don't do a PSOM to see what it looks like. I'm thinking after past experiences that you guys have, you know, say the last 10, 15 years without doing them, how much is saved versus how much you've spent in those 10 to 15 year thing. If that'd be great data for you guys moving forward, so we can justify to the customers when they say, why are they doing this again? Well, we said it saves this many houses, this much money financially in the long run. I think that'd be great. The second thing was, I'm tired of you guys always calling me every time I'm going out of town. Because you guys have been doing a lot down here, which is great. I appreciate it.
Well, you know, we, as emergency management, we love to make misery loves company, right? So, but I think also to answer to your third question of, you know, we'll never not PSOM, but we are doing that proactive vegetation management to make the need to proactively de-energize less. And I think that we can potentially show the benefit of that to our community when we don't PSOM as much by saying, we didn't have to do it because we turned our wood poles to steel here. We bought non-explosive fuses, things like that. So the other mitigation efforts will decrease the need for that big PSOM mitigation. And I think showing the community that and kind of doing that proactive stuff and showing what our crews are doing out in the field would be great. And the perfect example is the Tamarack fire. We lost over 60 poles. We possibly could have lost a substation, and we know every year that area burns. And so when we did our rebuild this, you know, over the next couple of days, we're switching as many of those poles from wood to steel so that, you know, we don't have to de-energize or we don't have to, you know, lose those poles and have customers out for days while we rebuild it. You know, we try to look ahead to the future, you know, for things like that. So I think that could be the best way. And you know, NV Energy is big and I'm sure somebody's crunching numbers, but it's not me.
No, that's great. Now here's my other question. This is the fire side coming out. If you're shifting to steel, you know, it's going to elongate at certain temperatures and those wildfires get into those temperatures. Do you guys have research on the benefit of going to steel, or are you guys just looking at the smaller brush fires where it's not as hot?
I think we're probably, so I guess it's ductile iron. I don't know if there's a difference, but I know we're probably just looking at keeping the poles up. What other impacts, you know, that would have to be on our other groups of implementation. I think my short-term thinking is so we don't have to keep replacing 60 poles every time it burns in that area. But I don't know about the other impacts possible.
That's all I have, Liz. Thanks and good presentation.
Thank you.
Liz, this is Dave Hunk up Reno Sparks. I just had a couple questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a couple questions. You mentioned the Green Cross program. Is that something that's how do you sign up for that? Does the individual have to sign up for it?
Yeah,
as a customer?
Yeah, customer. So an NV Energy customer, if they call into our contact center, in the north, it's 775-834-4444. Then that customer care rep can send them all the documentation needed to sign up. They'll have to take a form to their medical provider to justify their need to be a Green Cross customer or what device they're on, and then they get coded in our system as a Green Cross customer.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. And then also the My NV Energy, is that the app or something that you have?
Yeah,
available?
it's just our website. So my NV.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if, like where you would go view your bill, you can do like contact preferences and then add like a cell phone number, a landline, and an email address, and that gives us the options to get in contact with you before an event.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. That was a great presentation you just did. Good information.
Yeah, of course.
Any further questions for Liz? Awesome. Thank you very much, Liz. I know we had this presentation a couple of years ago by one of your field operators that has moved on to another company. And it's amazing to see how far you've progressed since that time and your efforts you're trying to take to make sure everybody stays safe. And I think we all got to remember that from the emergency management aspect, they're trying to reduce the wildland fire threat, but that also talks to us about evacuation shelters, public warning notifications, all those other issues that we have to keep in mind in our realm to keep moving forward for the public. So thank you, Liz. And we'll move on to item number 5. Item number 5 is bylaws of the Nevada Resilience Advisory Committee, NRAC. Discussion possible action. Chair and the vice chair will lead a discussion to review the NRAC bylaws. The committee may vote to amend the NRAC bylaws. And everyone should have in their packet the current bylaws for the committee. And with the change in NRS, we actually get to meet every quarter now instead of required every month. And so Chief Samuels and I are talking about how to change the bylaws. We changed one piece of it that's in your notes in red regarding attendance. And our proposal is that attendance is critical to achieving quorum, having balanced input, and conducting business of the committee. Any member who misses more than 25% of meetings may be removed from the committee at the discretion of the chair. So that is one change that we need to talk about. And then the other change I'd like to discuss, and we should have caught this one, we didn't, is under item number 5, meetings. It says committee meetings be called at discretion chair, but not less than once per month. That should be committee meetings will be called at discretion chair, but not less than once per quarter. And I like to leave the once or at the discretion of the chair because during grant season, obviously we'll probably have to meet a little more frequently to get all the grant stuff through. But we need to change that once a month and once a quarter. So Chief Samuels, do you have any other additional comments or thoughts on that before we open up to the group for theirs?
No, I don't. I think I like to listen to what the committee has to say and if there's any input. Obviously, you and I look at this from just our 2 points of view, so there might be some other views out there that we can make some adjustments to if needed.
Absolutely.
Chief Jeannie Freeman for the record. I have a clarifying question regarding the red change under Roman numeral 8. When we're looking at the 25% of the meetings, usually the stint on this committee is 2 years, I believe, but are we talking 25% in a 2-year period, 25% in a 1-year period? What does that look like?
I don't know if we really went to that detail because missing 1 meeting out of 4 isn't that big a deal, but missing 2 meetings out of 8 now kind of gets you behind, especially if we're going to start doing the grant stuff. So what does the group think? Is this missing 1 meeting per year and then I have the discretion to remove you? I think I already do in there, but we're just trying to make it more clear for everyone. Or do we want to say this is during your term when you miss 25%? Make it a rolling 2 years.
So Chief, this is Jeannie Freeman for the record. If your term is 2 years and you're talking about missing 2 meetings out of 8 and you're potentially going to go off the committee, then there really is no big deal. There's no reason to put this in there related to attendance. So, I mean, I think what you're trying to achieve is, and what the intent was of the attendance policy, even when we were meeting on a monthly basis, is to make sure that people are engaged and that they're not just engaging during grant season, but that they're engaging for what the whole intent is of the NRAC committee, which is much broader than what's happening during grant season. So I support the 25%. I just think that there needs to be, I think it's more on, if you miss a meeting, that there needs to be some justification for it. But that also holds to the fact of, it would be nice for us as NRAC committee members to have a standing schedule of what our meetings are going to be. If they're going to be the first Wednesday of the quarter or something like that, so that we can get them on our calendars, because it is very difficult when the meetings get moved around and sometimes they're a Tuesday, sometimes they're a Thursday. So I think that when you're having the attendance policy as something that kind of helps make us more accountable, that it's important that we're also holding the leadership accountable to give our meetings some consistency for us.
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point that we need to get to a point now that we know we're going to go quarterly, we can set those a little easier than what we did before the COVID and having to do it monthly. We had to change around to when we define quorum. But I think on a quarterly basis, it's easier to pick. It's going to be the first Saturday of the first month of the year type deal. Everyone likes the first Saturday idea, right? trying
Yeah,
to get together.
I was going to say, Jeannie Freeman for the record, please no Saturdays. I think we have enough of those kinds of things that occur.
What does the rest of the group think? Because I got another suggestion, but I want to hear from the rest of the group before I come up with another, throw something else out there instead.
So Matt Peterson for the record. I think under the attendance section, I love that we're going down to quarterly. It makes it much more attainable for the group. I'd like to see 2 of those meetings, at least a recommendation or a consensus from the group that 2 of those meetings are in person. It'd be nice to do those as a group and put some faces to some stuff and actually have a 2-day meeting or a meeting and a workshop combined so that we're seeing faces and working as a team, not just a Zoom meet every once in a while.
Great point, Chief. That's we got to get back to doing these in person because I think that's where we get more of the discussions. I think everyone's multitasking because I know that's what I do. I'm going down to Zoom meetings and texting somebody at the same time. And so when we're all in the same room together, I think we have much better conversations. So I do agree with going back to in-person meetings. I still think we need to have an option for the Zoom for the people who can't make it, but try to focus more on actually coming to a certain location to be together and share all those experiences at once.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that, maybe every other meeting could help us. Sorry to cut you off again. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. Tino Pereira for the record. So under the attendance section, I would propose that having it a percentage when we only have 4 meetings a year with a 2-year term doesn't make a lot of sense. So maybe change it to 2 consecutive meetings or 2 meetings within a 1-year time period. Something like that.
What does the group think about that? Because I do think that was going to be what I was going to propose because that's the idea that a friend of mine here in Carson relayed to me. And I think that makes a little more sense. It's easier for all of us to understand the 2 consecutive meetings. What does the group think about that? Because that now keeps you out of the loop for 6 months. And if we're going to start working on projects and continue these discussions about hazards, you miss 6 months, you've missed a pretty good segment of what we're talking about and the hazards that we're going into that next quarter to discuss.
Chief Jeannie Freeman for the record. I understand the consecutive meetings. I think that there I don't want to get in the weeds, but I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds because sometimes they need to be trimmed. But I think that some of what that needs to be is we know we're going to have 4 regular NRAC committee meetings. There will likely be special meetings that are called by the chair. And I think that when you're talking about this, I support the 2 consecutive meetings being missed of the regularly scheduled meetings. Not necessarily, I think those special meetings that get called should not be counted as part of that, because then we're still going to have people who just show up for those and then show up for a couple others.
I don't know if I agree with that one because the special meetings we call it be for something that we really need that participation in. And so if you're not going to attend, and because those are really going to be the grant meetings, and so I think those should count towards those 2 consecutive. And really it becomes the discretion of the chair because everyone's on this committee at my appointment from the law. And so if somebody's got a really good reason for not making it, this isn't an ironclad, thou shall be there. I think we're all trying to find ways to how do we get more people to attend more frequently and how do we get that involvement and engagement. And I think that's probably the bigger piece that I think we've all kind of had a circular conversation about. How do we get people more involved and engaged with providing advice and counsel back to Chief Samuels, myself, and the state, so that way we can move emergency management and Homeland Security forward in a great state.
And this is James Crithley for the record. How's everyone doing today? Yeah, my only comment would be, I think, that engagement piece, as we've learned, I mean, I think we're all used to the Zoom, we're all spoiled by the Zoom, but I think that the comment made earlier about having in-person meetings at least a couple of times a year, I think would be really helpful and not only the engagement in the discussion, but also just the networking and the interaction amongst each other during breaks, et cetera. And I'd certainly would be on board with, traveling to, and not just, because I think we split the site between Vegas and Carson City there the last couple of years, where prior to that, we used to all go up to Carson City and be in the same room together, which I think would be very helpful. And like I said, just stimulating that interaction and that piece that you guys are looking for. Just my thoughts. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just spitballing here, I think that I got to see if we have funding to do this, but to have everyone meet in person at the same location once per year, and we have one meeting where we're all together in one room. Is that where we can do that? And then the other meetings, I think that we leave them all, that there's in-person in Carson, in-person Clark, maybe in-person in Elko, or a Zoom option, but with the expectation that if you are able to attend in person, we attend in person. Because that's really what I think we get through.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the grant season meetings, I don't think quarterly is, you're going to have 2 or 3 meetings when we get to grant applications, right?
Yeah.
And that was very helpful in the past when we had those in person, but those were really, really long days. So, and I think breaking it up over 2 or 3, every other week or every 2 weeks or whatever the schedule works out to be. But one of those was in person would be nice, but not the 15-hour marathon either.
No, absolutely not. And I think we had good feedback from where we did this. We were actually able to do that in about 4 hours and knocked it out of the park, the sounds of it. So hopefully we can recreate that maybe even in person next year and do the same kind of system.
Great, thank you.
Chief Ancho, you either got a hot mic or you wanted to say something?
Well, this mic's obviously smarter than I am. I wanted to agree with what the past 2 gentlemen commented on. Definitely seen a decline in engagement in all of the meetings that we've been having, not just on the NRAC, but even at the local level and division level here in our own department. So in person, I'm highly in favor of that. Once a year, twice a year, however many it is. I think that's where the engagement will go up for sure. So.
Hey, Sharon, this is Billy Samuel. I like everyone's been saying, you and I have had this discussion, and I'd like more in person. But I look at climate, and so if we're going to do it in person, I want Q1 and 4 in Vegas and 2 and 3 up in Carson.
Agreed.
And that's for the record, sir.
I don't think anybody's going to argue with you. I think that's a great idea, and I think that just passed without even needing a motion.
But yeah, sir, on the attendance, I don't know if this is going to get settled today, but I think we need to address it. Moving to quarterly meetings versus monthly meetings, I think you got to look at the bylaws. And again, if we don't need to solve this today, this is nothing critical. We made quorum today, but I don't know by how much. It didn't sound like it was going to be by a lot. I'm just looking forward. I want to make sure we don't, get ourselves in trouble by not being quorum because we have people missing consecutive meetings.
Absolutely. And again, this gives me more discretion than discretion I already have. So if we made that attendance that you miss more than 2 consecutive meetings, may be removed at the discretion of the chair. I mean, that's about as solid as a Slurpee from 7-Eleven of a requirement for us to do. That gives you and I the ability to make some decisions on why they were gone and how they're gone. So if we did that and then change the meetings to once, not less than once a quarter, I think we can probably wrap the bylaws up. And then from the staff side, I'll direct staff to make sure that we pick a date that's the same date of a recurring basis or a day to have all the meetings in an in-person location with Zoom as an option, but we want to cattle prod you to come in person instead. And then I'll check and see if we have funding to do one in person at the same location for everybody. And we'll follow that Q1, Q2 plan that Chief Samuels has, because I think that's perfect when we're both at each other's wits' ends for the weather to be on the other side of the state to have some enjoyment. What are the thoughts of the committee from that?
This is Andrea S. for the record. I do think that sounds good. If we just pick the dates of when the in-person meetings would be and then the location, that helps for, you know, for planning it out, or even for me personally with our grant funding. I can't add travel funds to my budget once the county has approved the budget. There's no wiggle room. So if I don't have the funding in there, I literally can't travel, even if I try to move money around from another category. So knowing ahead of time, we're planning on our budget, that really helps. So I can say I'm going, you know, trips to Vegas. I have to tell state I'm going to Vegas. And that mileage isn't an issue. It's just buying plane tickets where we get into a little bit of a hiccup, but we can definitely plan for that and put that into our budget as long as, you know, we're planning that ahead of time. I know for the rest of this fiscal year, that's a little bit more difficult, and that's for me to figure out, but otherwise, I think in-person is definitely a good idea. Much better engagement, easier not to get pulled away from your office, text message, phone calls. So I agree.
Hey, Jeremy Hines for the record. Just for clarification to Andrea's point, in the past, the state has paid for those plane tickets to get us travel. Is that something that is going to be on the jurisdictions from this point forward, or is it still going to be on the state?
That's a piece I'm gonna look at, that when we do the north-south meetings and we're just getting together, but we're not getting all together, that would be the one where it would be on us to have to travel to wherever that location is. You know, if you drive from Henderson to Vegas or whatnot. But I want to see if the state has the funding for when we all get together to make sure that. I just can't commit to that until I actually talk to my fiscal folks to make sure that that is something we have to go to do. I think it is. So I'm about 99% certain we can pull it off, but I don't want to commit on the record that we can do that. But that would be my druthers, is that you're on this to help us, so we should be funding for that process.
Thanks, Chief.
Chief, this is Jeannie Freeman for the record. Maybe there's the potential of looking at how we can coordinate a quarterly NRAC meeting around the time that we do the NEPA conference, since that toggles back and forth between the North and the South, and that also is another event that encourages interaction and engagement.
No, that's a great idea. The NRAC conference should, or the NRAC meeting should be held during the NEPA meeting. That way we have all those other parties with us. It might not even be bad to look, because we got four public health preparedness partners, Green, Dr. Freeman, Andrea, Dr. Southern, and Misty. That wouldn't be bad to see what your travel schedule is for PHP to coordinate those things, so we don't book on top of those, but maybe we can book alongside them, so that way you guys have travel once and get 2 meetings for the price of 1. Okay, so I will work on the staff stuff. What does everyone think about the change in the bylaws to say we meet not less than a quarter or once a quarter, and then the two consecutive meetings?
Jeannie Freeman for the record. I'd like to make a motion to accept the amendment to the bylaws as stated by Chief Ogerson.
Okay, we have a first from Jeannie. We have
And
I'll second.
A second from Eric Holt. Thank you. Any discussion?
Chief Mike Heidemann, can you read the motion?
The motion would be under Article 5 for meetings. Committee meetings will be called the discretion of the chair, but not less than once per quarter. And then the second piece would be item number 8 under attendance. Attendance is critical to achieving quorum, having balanced input, and conducting business of the committee. Any member who misses more than 2 consecutive meetings may be removed from the committee at discretion of the chair.
Perfect. I just want to make sure that discretion of the chair was in there. Thank you.
Any further questions on the motion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, motion carries. We'll move on to item number 6 now, so that way I can stop talking for a little bit. This is the state warehouse transition status. John Backendall and Linda Southard, who I don't believe is here with us today, she's out sick, will update the committee regarding the estimated timeline and implementation of transition to a more permanent warehousing solution for state emergency preparedness supplies in coordination with the state purchasing division. So.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is John Backendall for the record. So we have taken multiple steps towards transitioning COVID response as well as primary focus warehouse operations over to the Division of Public and Behavioral Health, specifically the Public Health Preparedness Program for the state. They have a very small warehouse in northern Nevada that's historically been their use and capability towards supporting local jurisdictions with PPE in time of need. COVID has proven it's not enough. It's not the intent behind what they need to do and what we can do as a state to be better prepared for the next epidemic, pandemic, whatever that may be. So as we've gone through months and months of planning, we are now at the phase of transitioning the warehouse over to PHP in a few different steps. So they've begun as of July 1 in taking over the initial assessment of the resource requests that come into DEM and assessing them for the appropriateness as well as the capability of the jurisdiction to be able to purchase the PPE, whether it be due to funding or the size of the order. And then from there, assessing how and what PPE we would use from our stockpiles, both north and south, to meet these requests. That's a big step. They have received access to our email accounts into the logistics system, and they're now coordinating with our logistics staff daily on the resource orders that come in and try and complete those as soon as possible. We're looking at having that by September 30th, completely transitioned over to PHP to where they will be the reviewing agency of all PPE orders moving forward and allow DEM to step back from that component of the operation. We currently still have 2 different phases of PPE that we purchase. We call them legacy and dump. By legacy, it was the stuff that we were purchasing under public assistance reimbursement grant funding, which was originally at 75-25 and then transitioned to 100% FEMA reimbursement. However, that PPE can't just be giving away to any jurisdiction to manage for us. So DEM is working hard to reduce that stockpile and maintain what we call the DOMP PPE, or the Disease Outbreak Management Plan PPE. And that is primarily the stuff that we have bought with CARES Act funding, as well as received through donations that we would not necessarily need to worry about dealing with FEMA as we transition forward out of the PPE operations. So we have a 7-page document we've created that has an introduction to what we've done to this point, the purpose, mission, and objectives, which is primarily transferring the operation over to PHP. And then the concept of operations and how the state is looking at creating a warehouse operation run by state purchasing. State purchasing is the agency by statute that is allowed to manage such operation. DEM has taken that during the state of emergency. So over the next 6 to 12 months, we would be transitioning out of this entirely, having state purchasing coordinate the efforts of managing a warehouse, and then PHP would manage a PPE stockpile inside of there. I apologize for all the acronyms and short terms there. So if anybody has any questions on what I'm saying specifically on the acronyms, let me know.
What was the DRUM? DOMP?
Disease Outbreak Management Plan.
Okay. Haven't heard that one yet.
So we've got a whole mess of PPE. We've got over 3,500 pallets in the north and in the south, each in each warehouse, which is a culmination of gloves, masks, gowns, and gowns. We also have lots of testing supplies, syringes, needles. The most common things that were ordered during the operation. We still have a very large stockpile. We're trying to manage this by reducing that stock to get it down to where we can have one warehouse long-term in the state. The National Guard was running those warehouses for us. We've taken them out of uniform and put them into civilian clothes, and they now report to DEM as DEM contractors. We have 6 in Las Vegas and 5 in the northern warehouse that report to operations here at DEM, and we facilitate all of the operations of the warehouse at this time, other than the transition to PHP for currently reviewing the orders. This plan has an org chart in there that shows purchasing at the top with the safety officer and the command staff. Then the general staff, it would be the Division of Public and Behavioral Health, DEM, and then any other agency that we may need to incorporate into this operation as we move forward. Again, the ultimate goal is to get it down to a single warehouse based out of Southern Nevada. They use more than 75% of the PPE that's been stockpiled. They have more than 75% of the population in the state. And looking at warehousing pricing, it appears to be our best option so far in the South. Where all this lies at this point with the future development of warehouse operations is Dave, myself, and some of our logistics and operations folks here at DEM, along with a number of people from the Division of Public and Behavioral Health, as well as state purchasing, have presented to the governor's finance office a few times now on different processes that would be available to help facilitate a permanent facility in Nevada. So yesterday it was presented to the governor's finance office, the warehouse options in a PowerPoint slide. The first one was we continue to lease under our current operations, which comes to about $2.7 million every 6 months for both warehouses, and that includes all PPE management, personnel, equipment, and facility. If we did that, we're looking at, again, that's 2.7 every 6 months, so roughly about $5.5 million every year just to continue the leasing operations for 2 warehouses. We looked into a third-party logistics, that's called 3PL, including hiring the current nation's Strategic National Stockpile Office to manage this for us. We've gotten quotes in upwards of $60 million for a 10-year contract, which would yield us nothing at the end of 10 years. They would walk away at 10 years and we'd be in the same position we're currently in. So it is an option. It's a pricey option, just not necessarily something that would give us a long-term option. We've looked at building our own warehouse. Currently, the Department of Health and Human Services owns an undeveloped lot in North Las Vegas. It's almost 10 acres. But when we looked at contracting costs, as well as the pavement, the electric, the plumbing, and all the additional stuff needed to build a warehouse, we're looking again at well over $30 million to develop a warehouse. So we do have a couple options in Southern Nevada that are currently available to us in buying a warehouse that will either be developed or is being developed. They run currently for what we're looking for at about 200,000 square feet to be about $24 million for the purchase, and that does not include buying the racking system like a Costco or a Sam's Club inside. So that'd be another $500,000. Again, it would be run by state purchasing. So it would allow them to continue to facilitate what they do in buying large quantities of supplies for state agencies, and also accessing federal resource programs so that they would be able to take advantage of those federal programs that we're currently not doing. So basically our options are to continue what we're doing in a warehouse operation and try to figure out how to come up with $5.5 million a year after the FEMA public assistance ends, hiring a 3PL type of operation to manage a warehouse for us, and we don't do anything but submit orders to them, a build to suit warehouse if we could acquire the state land from the AHS and then build the warehouse, or buy an upcoming option that would be available somewhere in the state, preferably Southern Nevada. So what we've run into at this point is, where are we getting the money for this? So we've looked at CARES funds, which end at the end of this year, which most people have already allotted or allocated that money towards operations currently and potentially future through the end of the year. The ARPA funds were released to the state. That's those recovery funds. Nevada's received several $1 billion from each of those grants. So we have to, one, present our case, which is where the NRAC could come into benefit for us in being a political and jurisdictional ally in referencing not only your needs for PPE, but also the state as a whole as we continue to manage any potential need for PPE moving forward, but specifically current COVID operations, as well as utilizing this group and the 3 state agencies that are engaged to come together and maybe do more of a presentation as your job is to basically be the guiding body to DEM. So having some support behind this body to us, with us, along with the other state agencies, to help define what we are looking for as a state long-term in managing warehouse operations for any emergency, but specifically COVID operations currently. So as we continue to transition this, we wanted to keep this group updated. Again, we're looking for some support and input from this group, and then be a political and jurisdictional ally so that we can make requests to the governor's finance office. We're looking for the ARPA funds, and again, looking at $24 to $30 million for a single warehouse in Southern Nevada that would be managed and operated by the state purchasing agency that DEM and PHP would have access to. So that's what I have for information to share with you guys. Open to any questions, comments, or concerns on the current warehouse operation.
John, this is Jeannie Freeman for the record. When we're looking at state warehouse operations and stuff, I know that some of the things that we've done on local levels is looking at how we can have caches of different supplies for different purposes related to emergencies. And I know that you're talking about this going through state purchasing. We've had a lot of hesitation from partners about having certain supplies because people like it a certain way. They want it. They want certain products. And we can't even get our hospitals, and I only have 3. I can't get them to agree that they all want to, slide on the purple gloves kind of thing. Because one of them wants them blue, one of them wants them purple. So I guess when we're talking about some of this, I think it's a great idea for the state to have warehouse operations and to be able to have things in place for emergencies and be able to have that support. I'm completely behind that. I just want to make sure that when we're looking at things, how are we getting the buy-in so that we have the rotation to make sure that we don't end up having a warehouse of expired materials because we can't get the buy-in from other entities across the state to actually purchase them from the warehouse so that then we are recycling through and through.
So this is John, great question. We've approached that with FEMA a number of times on national level calls and trying to coordinate from the national level to the state level to the local level, having a PPE rotation stock policy. They're working on this with federal guidance and rules and policy. They've given us some guidance at this point that is similar to what you've said. Not only is it going to be that problem, there's a problem that if we potentially flooded the locals or the private sector who purchases PPE from the vendors, and we'll say McKesson, for example, that we could potentially put McKesson out of business because now they're not making their sales for that quarter because the government influenced PPE purchasing and PPE sales. So we pushed back on that a little bit when they were charging us $9 a mask. Maybe they should have saved $8.54 of that because the masks only costed them 46 cents to make. So they made a fortune off of us in our time of need. And so they need to look at a federal level what their policies are going to be and how legally that would impact the sales and the market for PPE. Personally, I don't care. They made billions off of us in our time of need, and we have nothing to show for it except for $60 million worth of PPE that probably would have costed us about $6 million during normal operations. So if they're willing to buy it back from us at what we paid for it, we'd be happy to give it back to them. But that's neither here nor there. These discussions are being had both on your concern, selling from federal to state to local, but also impacting the market is their biggest concern. So the feds are looking at this, and we're hoping to get more guidance as we move forward. What the state can do is mandate that the state agencies buy their PPE from this warehouse. They cannot mandate that the local governments do. However, we can work with local governments, especially, let's say, a small agency like Lincoln County or a small jurisdiction. Maybe Eric Holt doesn't have the opportunity to buy 9 million of something because it would all expire before they ever got to use it. So they could have the opportunity to buy at the price points that we have that would allow them to save lots of money in their economy for their jurisdiction. Whereas the Quad counties or Washoe or Clark, who have much more larger purchasing power, it wouldn't be a benefit to you all. You would have to review that on the cost benefit analysis. But for the smaller agencies and the state agencies, I think it could be a huge benefit so that we can rotate that stock and be beneficial in having fresh, non-expired PPE when it does become a need. And a Washoe or a Clark or a Quad does need what we have, similar to the beginning of COVID, that it wouldn't be expired. We wouldn't need EUAs to continue to manage our process, you would have what you need at the time. Again, it may be the purple glove and not the blue glove, but it's amazing what you'll take when you need it. And so we would have to rely on that, knowing this is what you get. So I suggest you take it and use it in the effort of state of emergency. So your questions, your comments are heard, and we are working on those and addressing those through the feds. We just haven't gotten full, well-documented policy yet. They are working.
So John, one other question to follow up on that. When we're talking about this warehouse and the state purchasing, is this strictly for government entities and state agencies, or is this something that private sector would be able to tap into if needed? Like, is there conditional situations, or is that not going to be an option?
Well, this is John again. Not being an attorney and not being with state purchasing, I'll tell you what I've heard third hand, that we would be able to sell to any person, including selling back to other agencies that we've received it from, or companies, I'm sorry. It's that payback to FEMA or payback to the grant guidance, however it was issued to us. We have to make sure we're following that guidance, but we would be able to sell it. It's giving it to someone is where we run into problems, especially if it's FEMA funded PPE, because if they are for profit, we have to be careful if it's not under a direct emergent need, like when hospitals couldn't get what they needed for emergency patient care. That was one thing, but for them to want it because it's still free and we can, offer it to them free versus $50 a case, that's not allowable. So we're currently making those that need the PPE certify that they can't find it due to either their funding mechanism or the purchasing power that they have, that they're not able to acquire the PPE. But we would be able to sell it to anyone who needs it, but we would use that money then to go back into the stream to purchase from a federal government or a large stockpile that the feds may have access to restock our pile. It would not be to go into some other fund or some other program for the state.
John, this is Billy. I want to make sure, if you guys are looking at if you're going to get private sector involved and other businesses like that, that is not running through my office that I'm sourcing to the state from there. That's a big burden when it comes to Clark County, and I have a local health or like a long-term care facility call me and say they need 3 boxes of gloves, then I just ship that to you guys. If that's your plan, I think we just need to have that communication with health and how they're going to run that. Second, when you look at our union and our health and safety on wearing, it doesn't matter the color of glove, it's the grade of the glove, the NFPA style. Medical grade is different than what our guys use. I don't want to make sure you guys are buying a whole bunch of stuff expecting that Clark County is going to purchase from you guys, but it doesn't meet the requirements of what our unions are wanting down here. So it's just something that we probably need to talk a little more offline to make sure you guys aren't buying stuff that we can't help you guys rotate through.
Yeah, this is John for the record again. Absolutely. It's always going to be pushed back to the local first if we get something from a local entity or an agency inside of your local government. We always direct back first. The only things we've been filling directly are the state facilities at this point. Everything else has been pushed back, and point taken as well on the different grades of gloves from non-medical to medical to responder gloves. We're tracking all that. We definitely need input on how things will be stocked and maintained moving forward.
And Billy, if this goes through and purchasing does take it over, it wouldn't be a thing that if we do start selling to, say, a hospital system where they start selling, because it's not going to be DM, it'll be them. It'll be between them and purchasing. Emergency management will be out of it. And that's what we're trying to do is to, as long as you're not a declared emergency, get our fingers completely out of this operation and leave it to the people that have statutory responsibility to do it. And then in an emergency, that's when we pop back in to run it through the normal channels that we've been doing through the pandemic.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Anything else for John? Anybody need any PPE? We can ship it to you right now. We've got plenty of gowns if you need some gowns.
Make excellent birthday suits.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 7. COVID-19 pandemic response status. Myself and Dr. Southard, who isn't here, It will lead a discussion on current disease burden of COVID-19, status of the crisis standard of care, status of emergency management involvement in the effort, and other items related to updated committee members on the cooperative partnership between emergency management and public health statewide. So the first thing, since Gwenda's not here, and I'll talk about crisis standard of care. Once you got the email, we had the meeting of the EPON, the Emergency Providers of Nevada group. That's the Chief Medical Officer, our InTech representative, Crystal, myself, some people from health, Melinda, some people from public health preparedness. I'm trying to remember who all was on that group because I didn't expect I was going to talk about this right now. So I'm trying to go through that. I know Dr. Lake is on there as well. So there's a group of people and they provide advice and counsel to state public health preparedness that give it to the governor's office regarding crisis standard of care. In our last meeting, we decided to continue crisis standard of care because the uptick in cases we're seeing. So crisis standard of care still stays in effect. We are asking that people start looking at what items did we do under crisis standard of care that are good practices we could continue in normal times, and also look at crisis standard of care for what we need to change in the future disasters so that we make it right. We had a great plan coming into it that had to be revised on the fly a lot, so we want to try to give whoever comes after us those lessons learned to make tomorrow better than today, because hopefully all of us aren't sitting around for the next pandemic. Hopefully it's another group of new kids and we've left them a good roadmap to follow from our lessons learned. On the COVID response status, as everyone's been seeing in the news, COVID cases are up in the non-vaccinated. There are some breakthroughs on cases on those vaccinated. The test positivity rate was 13.5 yesterday, and I believe it was 14.1 today. I couldn't find today's email, so I'm going off of what I'm trying to remember, but I did find one from yesterday, it's 13.5. That test positivity rate is pretty important because a month ago, 6 weeks ago, we were down in a 3% rate. So it's grown pretty dramatically. Some of that should be known to all of us because we opened everything back up and we started having regular events again. So we're going to see that. So now it's getting out the word that vaccines are safe, vaccines are something we should be doing, and talking to the folks about getting their vaccination. Obviously, Clark County put in a mask mandate for employees that are working indoors, and the state is continuing to follow the CDC guidance and allowing local control. So any local government can do their local controls more stringent than the state. You just can't be less stringent than the CDC guidance. We have rising cases, rising test positivity rate, and the hospitalization, but they're only occurring on that half the unvaccinated population. It's like 99.999% of people that are hospitalized with COVID are not vaccinated. And from looking at Chris Lake's latest data from the Hospital Association, our ICUs are 74% full, but they're only 20 to 30% full with COVID patients. The rest of patients are the regular medical patients that would be in that facility, just based on this time of year and that kind of grouping of patients. We put together a group and we've been talking a lot at the state. We've been meeting once a week, and we need a second time a week with the governor's chief of staff about what efforts we can take to affect this and how to make sure we're ready from the public health preparedness and emergency management aspect. Because we want to have this nipped in the bud by October 1st before we go into flu season. Because we're worried that if we go into flu season and we still have a high case rate, then we're going to go back to where we were with those cases and the hospitalizations and have the healthcare system impacts. So we're having a lot of meetings to talk about how we go that route. We're really monitoring that healthcare system impact pretty substantially. We got Dr. Lake looking at it from the Hospital Association. Our public health preparedness partners are talking. Billy Samuels in the South are talking to CEOs in the hospitals, and it's all about that communication loop to keep all of us in the loop about how things are going and what's going on. The state has stood up a get out the vax campaign. Got vax. Everyone's making fun of it down there, calling it goat vax, but it's got vax. And we're trying to use FEMA and local volunteers. FEMA is driving. We have local volunteers that are going up to doors and putting door hangers on to tell people where the closest vaccination site is to them and when that event is going to be held. We're also looking, and we're partnering with Southern Nevada Health District to open up 7 additional vaccination sites at EMVs and Department of Welfare and Supportive Service offices to get more locations for those communities to get out and get that vaccine. And we're also working to identify gaps in our vaccination areas to when do we have a gap for time or date or a region, and open up more sites there by adding in additional federal resources. Chief Samuels has opened up Stan Fulton again this week, using a combination of resources for testing and vaccination. Julia Peak is working with the federal government to bring in additional testing capabilities for all of us. The governor is working on a policy memo for state employees that are working in shops that have less than 70% that are vaccinated, and a testing requirement for those non-vaccinated people. So there's a lot of efforts going on there on a statewide effort to try to get that unvaccinated population vaccinated. And I'll open it up to Dr. Lake, our public health preparedness partners, Chief Samuels, or anybody that has additional comments or what we're doing, what we're not doing, what we could be doing, the good idea fairies, all those good things I'll open it up for.
This is Chris. I agree with everything you just said. The only other thing I'd reiterate is it is a younger population that we're seeing in the hospital right now. So pretty much from 30 to 59 years old that are coming into the hospitals really sick. So we're not seeing the correlated death rate like we saw in that third wave, but these are really sick people. So just throw that out there.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you for putting 30 to 59 in younger population. I think everyone on this Zoom call just smiled knowing that we're in the younger population. So anybody have anything else to add? Dr. Freeman?
Chief Jeannie Freeman for the record. I think some of the things that are really important for us to be looking at as a state have to do with the overall messaging. We know that the message has changed as the situation has changed since the beginning of COVID back in February of 2020. And I think that that messaging has become muddled with the vaccines and the testing and the masks. And, you know, everybody was really excited that the vaccine was going to become available and what that could mean for our numbers, the messaging around flattening the curve. We flattened the curve. Now the curve is bursting again, or it's increasing again. And yet we have more people vaccinated than we did when we were having the previous ones. And I think the messaging that, at least what we're hearing from our public, is that we've gotten the vaccine and now we're going back to masks, or there's the potential of going back to masks. And so I think the messaging around the vaccinations and what the intent is of the vaccinations and what the actual capability is of the vaccinations is a hypercritical message that needs to be communicated clearly. The public believes that if they get the vaccine that they're not going to contract COVID. And that's not an accurate reflection based on what we see nationwide with breakthrough. And I think that that is the other piece, is that also around the testing. In our jurisdiction, we've started testing again. And because we're seeing hotspots associated with COVID cases. But I think that, again, that encouragement is around, if you feel ill, stay home. Encouraging employers to encourage their staff to stay home when they're sick. We know employers, unfortunately, are really struggling right now because they're not getting people to apply for their jobs. And so many places are not keeping full hours because they don't have the staff to do so. And so when you turn around and we look at masks and we look at vaccines and we look at unemployment rates and everything, it's a perfect storm for a lot of other things that are going on. But I think that messaging needs to be clear. And if people are feeling sick, even if they're vaccinated, we want to encourage them to be tested. But our public, at least in the rural communities, I don't know how it is in our more urban environments, they don't want to be tested. They're afraid to be tested because they're afraid we're going to get shut down again. And that is a legitimate concern that they have. And so I think that it's an understanding of what is the goal that we're searching for as a state. And I don't think that that's been really made clear. Is our goal to be as a state under a certain percentage of positivity? Is our goal as a state to be at a certain percentage of vaccinations? And the answer may be yes to all of these. But I don't think that there is a clear goal or the objectives for us to meet that, for the public to really understand that. And so right now, in many ways, it is the state and public health against the public, and that's how they feel. And they feel like if they go get tested, they're going to be shut down. If they don't get vaccinated, then they're going to have to wear a mask. But if they do get vaccinated, who the hell cares? Because they're still going to have to wear a mask. And so I think that the confusion around this, you know, when we talk about cost benefit analysis in finances, we talk about risk reward in a lot of other ways. And right now, the public doesn't understand the risk because we've talked at them for too long. We haven't really talked with them. And we may feel like there's not time to talk with them, but unfortunately, they're pretty much telling us to pound sand. And they're done with us. And we can go and talk to them about risk, and we can say it's younger, and we can say it's a variety of things. But that messaging has been so muddled for so long that we're doing the best we can, and we'll count every single vaccination, and we'll count every person who doesn't go into the hospital because of the vaccination as a win. But there's a group of people who are pretty much telling us that what we say is worth nothing at this point.
Couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Freeman. And one of the discussions we're having is to engage a higher level marketing firm at the state level with some money to actually get a better message out. And that was when we wrote the vaccine plan, we wanted to have, you know, mdcovidfighter.org on every NDOT board, on every billboard in Southern Nevada. In the last couple of weeks, at least in Southern Nevada, the marketing has really gone up, and we're looking at engaging another marketing partner to increase that statewide. Because we need that common, consistent message, and it needs to be clear and concise. Because now we're dealing with not the people that are afraid of the disease, we're dealing with the people that are afraid of the vaccine. So that message has got to be, what does that vaccine do and how is it, and make people comfortable about getting it. And I don't think, nationally, I don't think we've done a good job with that at all.
So to follow up on that, Chief, I think we need to stop trying to scare the crap out of people, to be quite honest. I think we need to appeal to their knowledge, appeal to what is important to them. But in many ways, they hear it on the national news, they hear it from us. And trust me, I have my own concerns and I have my own fears about some of this, about the Delta variant and those kinds of things. I mean, we watch it, we see it. We have people that we care about that we've seen suffer related to that Delta variant. But I think that it's important for us to understand viruses mutate. Delta variant will not be the last variant that we see. We've already seen several. We are going to see more variants, and future variants may be even more virulent than what we've got right now with the Delta variant. But we've got to stop using fear appeals, because fear appeals have been shown in social science research for decades that they do not work. And we saw that with HIV, that it was, if you don't wear a condom when you have sex, you're gonna die. That didn't happen, so we lost the appeal of it. We're getting the same thing when it comes to COVID. The more that we try to scare people into submission of what we're asking them to do, the more that they're going to dig their heels in and turn their backs on us.
Completely agree, ma'am.
Yeah, this is Sean Rahmeyer for the record. I'd just like to follow up on some of Jeannie Freeman's comments there. And I agree wholeheartedly. And I think one of the great examples that we're seeing now is this push by governments, including here in Nevada, to essentially compel government employees to get the vaccine through this, what I've been hearing as perceived aggressive action towards weekly testing of employees, and purposely making it uncomfortable. And obviously that's a very aggressive move, or can be perceived as very aggressive. And so I would just offer, let's just take the time to include the community as opposed to speak to them and make these aggressive moves to the point that Jeannie was trying to make.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that. Any further comments? Okay, we'll move to item number 8, building resistant Building Resilient Communities Program and Mitigation Work Group. We're going to have a discussion on the recently awarded national competitive brick grants to increase national resilience. We're going to hear about the first meeting of the Nevada Hazard Mitigation Working Group. And I believe we have Janelle on. Janelle, are you there?
Yes, I am.
You want to start and talk, and then I'll cover anything else, or how would you like to do this, ma'am?
It's up to you, whatever your desire is. I can go over it, or you can go over what I gave you.
Why don't you go ahead here? I'd rather have it come from you instead of me trying to translate.
Okay, give me 1 second here. Okay, so regarding the BRIC 2020 grant cycle, there were 5 total applications that were funded under the $600,000 state set aside, and 1 state management cost application. So 6 total grants were chosen to go forward for Nevada. Nevada submitted 2 competitive projects, and neither one were chosen to move forward. Of note, there were 22 competitive projects selected over 10 states, with 1 internal state being Kentucky receiving 1 project to move forward, and the rest were chosen from coastal states. So that's just a side note. We had 1 hazard mitigation plan update for Lincoln County, 4 project scoping applications, 1 for Carson City for a flood scoping project. Governor's Office of Energy applied for City of Reno microgrid project scoping. Governor's Office of Energy applied for University Medical Center microgrid project scoping. And Mesquite applied for a flood wall project scoping. And then again, as I mentioned, the state management costs. And Dave, I don't know if you want me to stop in between and answer any questions that anybody might have.
Yeah, let's see if anybody had any questions. I got a little commentary there too from talking to FEMA about this too. Anybody have any questions regarding the BRIC awards, the competitive or the state awards? Okay, I was actually at a conference with all the state emergency management directors when the BRIC awards were announced. And it was like a bomb had gone off because only those 10 states received those competitive awards. And some FEMA regions didn't even receive an award for any state within the region. So there was a lot of anger in the room that day. And we had Bob Fenton here yesterday and talked to him at length about the BRIC program, the competitive nature. And he said that there's some things that will probably be changing with the next round of these BRIC competitive grants, that they learned some lessons on how to write the NOFO for it and how to make it work better for them. And sounds like they are taking the advice of some people, but politics are also involved because it's a competitive grant, just like we see with the UASIs and all that stuff. So there's really no difference on the resilience side than any of the other grants we get when they're competitive. There is that political piece to it. But we did have a good conversation with Bob about possibly doing some changes, and I'm going to write a letter from the state, because one of the things that we lose as a state is we lose some points right off the bat because we don't have a state adopted building code. So Bob and I crafted a way to write a letter that would show that the state doesn't have a adopted building code that's universal throughout the state. Every jurisdiction right now, except for 2, do. So don't penalize the jurisdictions that are putting in for it based upon the fact that 2 rural counties don't have a building code. So we're going to see what we do to get some more of those points for next year, so that way then we can do better. It sounds like the next grant cycle will be a little bit more, like twice as much money, so they can fund some more grants. So those are all good news is coming out of that FEMA did it, but learned some lessons from it, and next round will probably be better. So hopefully we get some of our Nevada projects in there and make our state more resilient. Back to you, Janelle.
Okay, and as far as an update from the Nevada Hazard Mitigation Working Group, We did have our first meeting in June, the very end of June. And the meeting basically just I went over the mitigation program for the state of Nevada, explaining what's involved in the program, what's involved with technical assistance, what's involved with planning for our state hazard mitigation plan, and how this group is going to be very instrumental in working with the Bureau of Mines and Geology and myself to update our plan. The plan expires in October of 2023. So the plan right now is to submit that to FEMA by July of 2023. And we will be using some experts both within this working group and outside of the working group in order to update each hazard section for the plan. And this time we have multiple people looking at the same hazard. So we'll have input from multiple people for each hazard. Let's see. So, and then we went over, the different grants that are put together through hazard mitigation. The next September quarterly meeting will likely be held in Carson City. I need to contact them first. But we have 2 Southern Nevada members who will travel north for that meeting. So we'll be in person for that first meeting, but we'll still have the opportunity for a Zoom meeting along with that. And so that'll be the first in-person working group. We're looking forward to that, and being able to start with Carson City will be a good one because they do have a significant seismic risk here. And according to Dr. DiPolo, is the largest risk within the basin and range section of the states. So I think that'll be very interesting. We will start introducing the different portions of the hazard mitigation plan as we update it, and looking towards the BRIC program along with the HMGP post-fire program. In the past, we have kind of expected the fire people to use more of the funding, but each year we get more and more funding for the fires, both fortunately and unfortunately. So what we are doing now is letting everybody know right up front, here's funding that's available. Be working to put your projects together, because the funding for the HMGP post-fire is an allocation and not competitive. So it's only competitive amongst each other within the state. So that's about it, Dave.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions or comments for Janelle?
Chief Billy Samuels. Who's all part of this Nevada Hazard Mitigation Working Group? Where are the people from?
Dave, you want to answer that, or you want me to?
Go ahead, ma'am.
So the different members there's a couple that were taken from the NRAC committee, and most of them I think were non-voting members. There's a certain group that is required by FEMA to be included in a mitigation committee. And so we have a certain amount of state staff through the different agencies. There's some health people, we have a tribal representative. We have, some of those different ones. We also took our top hazards and put a SME for those hazards onto this committee. So I think right now we have 13 or 14 members on that committee. And if you want, I'm happy to read off the names to you if that's what you're wanting, or if you're just wondering what types of people are on this group.
No, if you could read out the names, that would be great. Due to the fact that if the Nevada Hazard Mitigation Working Group, it should be encompassing of all Southern Nevada, Northern Nevada, and everything in between. So if I get the names, I think that would help probably this whole committee.
Sure, just one moment.
Hey, Chief, I think we sent those out last meeting. I'll send out the bylaws and committee members. That way we got it in writing for everyone. The committee, we did pick people from across the state for this purpose and to meet all of FEMA's requirements on who's supposed to be there. And the committee is to advise me and my role as the state administrative agent for approving those federal grants. And that was a committee that existed before NRAC. It was one of the committees that got folded into NRAC, but also one of the committees that made NRAC have 34 members because we had to put all those special groups in here. So part of our diversification, we talked about previously about how to make it so that way that group can be more scientific and nerdy and have those conversations, but then bring back their ideas to us as a bigger group to do implementation. So we'll send that stuff out to all the members after the meeting.
Awesome. Yeah, if we can do that, thanks, Chief. And I don't need the names listed. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Any other questions for Janelle? Okay, thank you, ma'am. We'll move to item number 9. Only 2 more left on the agenda. But the last big one we got, this is an energy sector update. Discussion only. Jennifer Taylor, the Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Energy, will discuss with the community what the role of the Governor's Office of Energy is in the emergency operations and its coordination with the Nevada Department of Agriculture on petroleum. As a community lifeline, this is pertinent to NRAC as it advises the chair on methods to improve Nevada's resiliency in the energy sector. Jennifer, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Chief. If everybody can hear me, I apologize for not having a PowerPoint, but I'm just going to give a really high-level overview of our role in emergency planning and operations, and specifically GOE's role in energy assurance as the ESF-12 designee. I'll also share some of the collaborative work between GOE and Department of Agriculture on petroleum planning, and then I'll highlight some of GOE's work in resiliency and mitigation, some of which Janelle also touched on. So GOE serves as the ESF-12 and prepares that role's energy assurance and emergency operations plan. Our role in emergency operations and coordination with the Nevada Department of Agriculture on petroleum issues is part of that plan. As a community lifeline and energy, Chief just read that point, but just to let you know, I'm a little biased on energy as a community lifeline because I do see it as, the foundational community lifeline for any of the emergency planning and emergency sectors. Just to let you know as well that for GOE to get DOE financial assistance, or for DOE financial assistance to come into the state, the CFRs do require the submission of an energy emergency plan for an energy supply disruption as designated by the state and consistent with applicable federal and state laws, including implementation strategy or strategies, such as regional coordination for dealing with emergencies in the energy sector. The authority for GOE to serve as the ESF-12 and to prepare the energy assurance and emergency operations plan is under Chapter 701 and Chapter 416 of NRS. Chapter 701 grants GOE authority in the preparation of the plan, and NRS Chapter 416, and I know you guys all know this, delineates the handling of emergencies concerning water or energy. There are also some federal authorities that provide that direction and designation for GOE, and that includes the ESF-12 Energy Annex, the Homeland Security Presidential Directive, Presidential Policy Directives, and then 6 U.S.C. 101 and 42 U.S.C. 5195C sub E. So the Energy Assurance and Emergency Operations Plan is prepared again by GOE with supplementary staff assigned by the governor. We serve in the primary agency role for responding to energy emergencies. And To start with, whatever the emergency situation and degree of government involvement, GOE serves as the central clearinghouse for energy information and is responsible for assessing energy impacts in Nevada during any events that impact energy price and supply. GOE develops recommendations to address the situations. We coordinate with NDEM and reporting of those situations to US DOE offices and electricity delivery and energy reliability. We deliver status messages and direction to the public. We perform resource supply responsibilities such as energy related aid and support that I'll cover in a second. And we carry out any other functions that may be identified by NDEM as the lead agency. The Energy Assurance and Emergency Operations Plan was most recently updated and signed by the governor in October of 2020. GOE has a lead operations role, again, in these emergency operations, and provides assistance in coordination with NDEM and other collaborative agencies. We utilize, GOE's plan incorporates and utilizes the NIMS and NDEM Emergency Operations Centers procedures, lists for contacts involving ESF functions. And again, we serve with NDEM as the lead coordinator for any state emergency. What GOE monitors in that ESF 12 role is electricity, natural gas, petroleum, and then critical energy infrastructure, though that falls under the jurisdiction of Homeland Security as identified in the plan. The Energy Assurance Plan recognizes the need for multi-agency coordination because we recognize that effective communication with other state agencies, federal agencies, and local jurisdictions is essential to a coordinated state response to an energy event. Some of these agencies include the Board of Regulation for Liquid Petroleum Gas, Department of Administration for Finances, again, Department of Agriculture for Fuel Supply Availability, Specifications and Variances, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and the Division of Environmental Protection on Air Quality issues, Public Safety and Highway Patrol, Department of Information Technology on cybersecurity issues, Department of Transportation on fueling sites, the Welfare Division for support on funding for energy costs for those unable to pay in the event of emergencies causing high prices, Office of the Military for protection of that energy infrastructure, our Public Utilities Commission that regulates some of our energy suppliers, and then state and local governments such as Clark County's Division of Air Management and Quality, which is now Clark County Division of Environment and Sustainability, and then the Washoe County Air Quality Management District. We also work with US DOE and NASIO, which is the National Association of State Energy Offices, in the programs for energy assurance coordination. This includes trainings, exercises, and the development of best practices. The federal government, including DOE, through the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability, industry coordination, cooperation, and communications also helps with the best practices and roles served by GOE in energy emergencies. Another item that falls within the work GOE does in its roles in ESF 12 is that coordination and cooperation with other states. Particularly California, is of utmost importance because the majority of petroleum fuels are imported into Nevada from California via the pipeline and trucks. The California Energy Commission has substantially greater resources and is capable of tracking events and developing information in advance of GOEs obtaining that information. Since Nevada is so dependent upon petroleum from California, many events, including disasters or facility emergencies in California or market decisions by users of fuel, could impact supplies in Nevada, and therefore that coordination is essential. Nevada sits in PAD 5, which includes other states such as Alaska, Arizona, California, Hawaii, Oregon, and Washington. PAD 5 is essentially a self-contained oil supply system. And because of that isolation, that's why that cooperation and coordination is so critical. The Energy Assurance Plan also relies upon a mixed strategy response to an energy shortage using free market approach with government intervention only to the extent necessary to protect the interests of public health, safety, and welfare. Activation of the management and information system and the implementation of specific programs described in the plan occur only when an energy shortage substantially disrupts Nevada's economy and normal operation. As such, during the early stages of a shortage, the primary role of state government is monitoring and information exchange rather than direct intervention in industry efforts to restore services and satisfy customer requirement. GOE serves as a central source of credible and timely information on how a shortage affects the state. The plan is intended to lessen the potential adverse impacts of a shortage by providing the governor, legislature, and policymakers, including NDEM, with accurate and timely information for decision making. So what are some of GOE's activities on recognition of an impending energy emergency? We may receive information from entities like the governor's office, Division of Emergency Management, DHS, the PUCN, DOE, energy industry contacts, media, or the Department of Agriculture. Upon recognizing that there is an impending energy emergency, it'll be necessary to evaluate the need to activate the continuity of operations plan that's described in the energy assurance plan under Appendix D. Sorry, guys, I know you've been on this call for a long time, so I'm trying to get through this really quickly. Upon recognizing that energy emergency, we do have in the plan an action planning and a preliminary assessment regarding notification by staff of actions needed to make determinations on next steps. In the plan, just like in most plans, there are response phases for emergencies that are going to be elevated depending on the severity of the shortage and a number of other factors, since every emergency around the energy sector is going to be a little bit different. We've got the readiness phase, the verification phase. That is where more formal communications network between agencies would be in place to determine the nature, extent, and duration of a potential or impending shortage on petroleum, natural gas, propane, ethanol, or electricity, or impacts to energy prices and availability. There's the pre-emergency phase, which is an increased level of activity, and that's really where GOE and emergency management start to establish chains of discussion, additional resources, and potentially convene the Energy Emergency Center as needed. And then finally, there's the emergency phase, which would involve all activities initiated during the pre-emergency phase, plus additional voluntary or mandatory programs needed to respond to a worsening energy shortage. Mandatory programs require an energy emergency or impending energy emergency. They require a declaration, an EO signed by the governor, and under NRS 416.050, that would be what would kick in mandatory conservation programs. At this point, NDEM takes over the lead under the NEMS program. Within the emergency response actions, there are 4 broad categories. There's coordination, planning, and analysis. There's public communication programs. There's mitigation and conservation programs. And within that, there's 2 main categories. One is voluntary energy conservation, and then one is mandatory mitigation measures. Those mitigation and conservation programs are intended to create strategies for reduction of energy demand. And one of the mandatory measures would be a fuel allocation program, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And then we also have a situation report procedures checklist. Recognizing the impact of energy on the economy, there is also identification of economic assistance programs. Although market mechanisms usually affect an efficient balance of supply and demand, disproportionate economic impacts on low-income households may occur during energy events. In recognition of this, GOE and the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services have identified programs that could be augmented in an emergency. There's 3 main energy-related economic assistance programs. That is the Community Services Block Grant, LIHEAP, which contains 2 components. That's the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. The 2 components are Energy Crisis Intervention Programs and Home Energy Assistance Program. There's also the US DOE Weatherization Assistance Program, or WAP. In addition, there are utilities that maintain programs to assist with or defer payment of utility bills for eligible parties. And as we saw in the early phases of COVID, making sure that there was relief and protection for folks impacted in their jobs, to not have to worry about paying their bills while they might be unemployed was one of the first actions that was taken. And then finally, DWSS works with a network of community-based organizations to provide the resources needed to break the poverty cycle around energy costs and energy burden. These agencies include local governments and other community-based organizations servicing low-income Nevadans. Because of this existing network, there is flexibility in place to implement energy emergency assistance. So what all is included in Appendix B? That is the guidance for petroleum shortage response and is the foundation for which GOE works in coordination and cooperation with the Department of Agriculture around petroleum shortages. Part of the key piece of Appendix B is obtaining and distributing information from the petroleum industry to include as necessary producers, suppliers, wholesalers, and retailers. That includes pipelines, that includes private petroleum marketers. And as the entity that regulates and works with those petroleum providers, Department of Agriculture really has the lead role in obtaining those communications and getting those initial indicators that there might be an issue. Department of Ag and GOE will collaborate on preparing press releases or other public communications concerning those disruptions or shortages in the supply of motor vehicle and or aviation fuel supplies. So in addition to that coordination piece, there are a number of tools that were developed sort of at a national level, but are opportunities across states for dealing with petroleum shortages. And those could include things like waiver for driver hours of service, waivers for environmental fuel specifications like blends, waivers for tanker truck weight limits, retail gas station priorities for essential services, use of alternative fuel programs, petroleum priorities for essential services, emergency generators and transfer switches for retail gas stations. And I would highlight that as part of the reason that GOE was interested in submitting applications for some of our critical infrastructure to start looking at on-site generation to obviate the need for those emergency generators should there be fuel shortages or fuel disruptions. As you can tell from some of those waivers dealing with some of the priorities in terms of essential services, those fall within AG's regulation of the petroleum supply chain. And then we work at GOE in coordination with AG on those other items. Appendix B also includes a fuel allocations plan and petroleum set-aside function. The application process is detailed in that plan, talks about fuel use category, appeals, prioritization, et cetera. And then finally, one of the other options in Appendix B is to work with the Department of Transportation to develop and implement conservation measures as described in the relative mitigation and conservation sections and appendices of the plan. In a fuel emergency, NDOT sites could be used to fuel emergency and first responder vehicles. And that's why it's important that that is another one of the collaborating agencies and partners in making sure that fuel emergencies are addressed and mitigated. And then finally, Appendix C includes our work with federal partners, again, including DOE, EIA, which is the Energy Information Agency, and FEMA. So that's my overview on the plan. And then just to talk a little bit more in detail about our collaboration with the Department of Agriculture and with the Division of Emergency Management. AG is currently finalizing a communications and coordination plan for petroleum shortages that will include how needed information is passed to GOE as the ESF 12 to potentially move through and up emergency response phases discussed above. GOE and AG issued guidance to fuel providers at the start of COVID-19, identifying the fuel supply chain as essential services and recommending those entities remain open for business. There is a regional regional group called the Western Petroleum Shortage Response Collaborative, made up of those Intermountain West and West Coast states. GOE and the Department of Agriculture regularly participate in those calls to provide updates, learn from our peers, and obtain information needed to be able to respond to petroleum shortages. This group was created to facilitate that coordination and the development of a regional catastrophic fuel response framework among that subset of Western states' emergency management and energy offices. It's a state-driven initiative acknowledging the need to work together and share resources to best address state and regional petroleum shortage preparedness and response needs. Just for your information, those states include Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, us, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. The primary purpose is to codify guidance for coordinated response, prioritize response actions and measurements, standardize information flows, and pre-identify tools and templates that may be necessary to respond to a petroleum shortage. The WPSRC regional framework also provides, again, those sort of best practices and toolkits that we can use in the event of emergencies. And then finally, in this past weekend, Department of Agriculture, Emergency Management, and GOE all had the opportunity to test some of this planning with the fuel shortages at the Reno airport that you may have seen coverage on. We were able to go through Appendix B, figure out what options were, and essentially exercise the plan for future events of shortages. And then finally, just to give you all sort of an overview, and thank you again so much, Chief Ogerson, for allowing Energy to come and talk to this group. I know that the last meeting you had talked a little about some of the plans, but we really appreciate the opportunity to get plugged in and share with you how critical energy and energy infrastructure is to all of the important and great work that your advisory committee does. So a little bit more about our mitigation and resiliency work. Chief Samuels asked who all was on the mitigation working group that Janelle discussed. The chair of that group is actually Lorraine Walser, who is one of our management analysts who has a background in emergency management. And so she is really excited to bring that overlay of energy, resilience, and mitigation to that working group. Janelle also mentioned that GOE partnered with our local governments on 2 BRIC grants. And we were really excited to see that the scoping be identified as eligible, and look forward to hearing from Janelle next phase on actual funding and getting grant documents put together. I would echo Chief Ogerson's discussion on the disappointment and frustration of a lot of states. And I will tell you from the perspective of NASIO and some of the other sort of nationwide entities that we work with, there was a lot of disappointment that there was not a more sort of innovative set of projects chosen. I was on a call a couple weeks ago with the administrator for the BRIC program, and I did ask her what was the status on the NOFO from the perspective of additional administration priorities around climate. And she did say to expect that climate and equity would be components of this upcoming NOFO. So I'll be interested to see what that looks like and how we can continue to move forward Nevada's opportunities around renewable energy, solar, on-site generation, those types of projects and innovations that support resiliency in our communities, support the governor's climate goals, and protect the state from those disruptions around petroleum in particular, given our limited resources and access. And then Janelle also mentioned HMGP and the set aside. Janelle called me to see if I had any projects in the pipeline, and I was able to connect her with City of Las Vegas and worked with them to put in a project again for scoping around looking at microgrids at some community centers that could be used then as resiliency centers in the event of an emergency. There's also something that I'll be interested in seeing how FEMA adapts is the BCA, the benefit cost analysis that has to be done in order to submit a project and have it be eligible, and how that evolves in terms of things like on-site generation and batteries to create those microgrids that may provide that backup generation, even in the event of a petroleum disruption from traditional generators. And then finally, again, Janelle mentioned your plan, the state plan, and so we would love to continue to be part of discussions and evaluate opportunities to support mitigation and resiliency in the development of that plan, whether it's tweaking language around priority hazards, helping to develop projects that can really take advantage of Nevada's resources to provide resiliency and mitigation, or just, again, being a resource on energy systems and energy issues. So with that, thank you for letting me ramble through extraordinarily quickly, and I am available for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming today. Sorry we put you at the end of the agenda. We didn't expect to go this long and have to cut you short like that. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Jennifer? Okay, perfect. Thank you. And we'll have her back again in the future, so we're going to continue this discussion because energy is one of our lifelines we need to really pay attention to. So, okay, we'll move on to item number 10. This is public comment, closing public comment. Does anybody have any public comment? If you're on the phone, remember *6 to unmute yourself. Any closing public comment? Okay, hearing no closing public comment, we'll move to adjournment.
Bob Denhart, so move.
Thank you, Bob. First by Bob. Do I have a second from somebody?
Kelly Echeverria, second.
Second, Kelly. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Continue the meeting and stay longer, say no. Okay, see you guys in a quarter. Thank you very much.